Good afternoon. Welcome to Business This Week on ITV. I am Blessing AG. Today we have three scintillating discussions for you. Now, after the show, I'm sure you will agree with me that the discussions were indeed scintillating. So just stick around for the rest of the show. Now, let's bring you a roundup of business activities for the week. On Business Roundup, it is no news that Nigeria has a very huge debt profile. How it is coping with the debt profile is a first story as the World Bank, IMF, to assess Nigeria's debt sustainability. The president of the World Bank Group, David Malpass, has said that the bank will work with the International Monetary Fund to assess Nigeria's debt sustainability. Malpass said this during the 2022 annual meeting's opening press conference in Washington, D.C. on Thursday. He said they will work with the IMF on an assessment of the debt sustainability of Nigeria, but it will be up to Nigeria itself to interact with the various creditors, which include bondholders, official creditors, which are engaged in Nigeria. Earlier, the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, had disclosed that the Nigerian government was in talks with the IMF and the World Bank to restructure the country's debts. However, the World Bank Group president said that Nigeria was yet to request the common framework for debt restructuring. Malpass further noted that there was an ongoing discussion to ensure that this process could help a country to have a standstill on their debts and choose a path forward on debt restructuring, which means they will get a break on debt payment while they decide on how to restructure their debts. He also said that Nigeria's subsidy was too large, undermining the government's revenue, adding that the situation in Nigeria was really concerning. And now to the oil sector, the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited and the Petroleum Training Institute, PTI, are to install anti-theft integrated monitoring systems on pipelines to monitor the facilities against crude oil theft. Nigeria has been losing billions of dollars for several years due to the activities of pipeline vendors who steal the country's crude massively. Speaking in Abuja at the Petroleum Training Institute's 50th anniversary, the Principal Chief Executive, PTI, Henry Adimula, said that the institute had developed an all anti-theft integrated monitoring system to effectively monitor pipelines. Adimula, who said this was one of the recent innovations of the PTI, stated that it produced an all anti-theft integrated monitoring system for pipeline monitoring and an air quality monitoring systems. Reacting to this while delivering his address at the event, the Group Chief Executive Officer, NNPC, Milikiyari, said the oil company was pleased to hear what the institute had done in terms of pipeline monitoring. He then told the PTI that NNPC would work with the institute to deploy the technology to further boost the monitoring of NNPC's pipelines with a view to addressing crude oil theft in Nigeria. We're going to a quick break and then return to start talking business. Stay tuned. Thanks for staying tuned. Now let's begin with Nigeria's debt restructuring proposal. This has been really creating some tensions around Nigeria's economy, particularly with the financial institutions, most of whom are lenders to Nigeria. I have Dr. Saze Iyua in the studio with me. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me as well.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, now, so once the finance minister made a comment about Nigeria planning to restructure its debt, it seemed like that comment stirred lots of waters, and reactions have been coming up from that. But let's even look at restructuring. Let's start restructuring of a country's debt. What would that mean?
Yeah, I listened to the comment of the minister when she was, I think they were attending a World Bank summit. And I can understand why later on there seemed to be some clarification, or the word, should I use the word denial, about the use of the term restructuring. Because usually when a country or a corporation or whatever now starts asking for restructuring, it becomes an admittance of financial distress. It becomes an admittance of the fact that you have now run into close to bankruptcy. In fact, when you have financial distress, you have just two options. Either you go for restructuring or you file for bankruptcy. So that's why you see that it's a very tough situation. And it's something that you usually want to run away from. So I understand they were now using the word renegotiation, but renegotiation and restructuring,
and it's not semantics.
It's like one and it's semantics, exactly. It's one and same thing, because what's restructuring? Restructuring is a situation where a country or a corporation is now facing dire financial distress, liquidity problems, and it now has got to a point where it cannot meet its debt service obligations, not to even talk of paying the debt back. So just for, it's like should I call it a win-win situation for both the debtor and the creditor, because all it does is you renegotiate the debt, so that usually it comes with extending maturity period of the loans. So when you extend the loan maturity period, it means that you are trying to reduce the amount of servicing that you pay annually. It's just like if you have to buy a television on credit, 100,000 naira, and you have to pay in a year, it means that you'll be paying probably 10,000 every month, or 9,000. But if you have to pay in 5 years, it means you'll be paying it, you will not be paying as much as 10,000. If you have to pay in a year, it will be as much as 10,000. But if you have to pay in 5 years, it will be around 5,000. So that's just what it's just. So sometimes it has to do with extending the lifespan of your debt, of your loan, so that the debt service will now be smaller, since it's for a longer period. And usually it also comes with asking for some rebates, reduction in your debt. Then it also comes with debt service, equity through debt swap. So you could sell, the country could probably sell bonds or equities in probably some government-owned organizations like NMPC. And so you're more like exchanging your debt for equity in your national assets, that's your airports and so on. So, but usually it means that you are asking for favorable terms. Either you are reducing the amount of the loan, or you are asking for longer terms so that your interest can be smaller. The whole essence is so that you have financial relief to be able to meet the debt service, and so that you don't file for bankruptcy. And most times, it's almost like a win-win for both the debtor, because the creditor does not also want a situation where you cannot pay your debt. Because most times, imagine just let me use a company for example. You are owing me, a company is owing me so much money. It has as much assets, but it also has much liabilities. So I would prefer to forgive him his debt or restructure, because if he goes bankrupt, whatever I get from asset, because he has large liabilities too, I'll have to pay. So even if he has companies, buildings, lands, you sell all those, you have liabilities to pay too. So the difference might just be small that I will get. But if you do a restructuring, it means that I now become like either a part owner of that company. So I allow that company to run as a going concern. Then continue business, try to get customers. You're almost like taking ownership of the company. So that's where Nigeria is. We are not asking for renegotiation of debts according to the term, but restructuring is that it's usually an admittance of the fact that you can no longer pay your debt. And we saw it in the second quarter, where the minister said our revenue, projected revenue was 3.6 trillion. We made just 1.86 trillion, and our debt servicing was about 3 trillion. So it means we even borrowed to pay our debt. We used about 130% revenue to debt servicing ratio. So it's now like we are now admitting it. And you know, most of the debt that the country took in 2015, when this government came into power, 2016, 2017, all those bonds that were sold to domestic debts to citizens. Some had 5-year tenure, 7-year tenure. So most of them are now due. Bonds that were sold in 2015, 2016 are now due this year and next year. So they are due for payment. So
and it's at a time when to even service
financial is
the debts that are there.
Yeah,
it's a problem. Let's
hectic,
talk about the ones that are due.
Exactly. That's even external debt. So the domestic debt has to be paid. So it means that we are not even talking of debt service, and they now have to now start paying. So it will also involve them trying to negotiate with bondholders to trying to negotiate. I know it's more difficult with the Euro bondholder. It's not like World Bank, Paris Club, IMF that you can sit down on a table. But Euro bond holders are scattered everywhere.
They're individuals,
Ghana,
they're
exactly.
companies.
Exactly. So somebody in Ghana bought Euro bond, somebody in Chinese bought Nigeria Euro bond, someone in Lagos. So how do you gather them on a table to have a negotiation? So usually they go for consultants they take consultants or advisors to help them do all the negotiations. So usually I think it's just a dire situation. As I said, it's an admittance to the fact that the country is in a dire situation. No matter how much we try to refurbish the word or use the right word, it's a terrible situation. But I think at the end of the day, look at our last debt. As at March, they say our debt is 41.6 trillion. You know, that's March. By now, I think it should have gone to about 42 trillion. That our ways and means makes it 20 trillion. So it means we are already in the neighborhood, including ways and means, we are already in about 60 trillion naira now as our public debt. And we are going for another one this year. So we are heading very, very steadily towards 70, 80 trillion naira as public debt by the end of next year. So restructuring has to be the way to go, but it's a damning verdict, it's a damning judgment on the country as well. Really.
Okay, we'll revisit that opinion of yours that restructuring has to be the way to go, because there is another school of thought that refinancing perhaps should have been a better alternative. But we'll come to that. Let's look at as it is now, or as it was before the change of term from restructuring to renegotiating. So as it was as restructuring, at that point when the minister made the statement, the World Bank boss said they were yet to receive notification about Nigeria's plan. Did you think that the minister should have done that first before making that statement?
Yes, I think so. Just that before I go to we talked about refinancing. Refinancing really has to do with swapping new debts for old debts.
Yes.
So so that will also depend on your creditors. So are they ready to allow for that swap? Because when you are swapping new debt for old debt, they are literally saying that your old debt should be forgiven. Give me a new debt. Let's use it to cover that former debt at usually at reduced interest. But that has to be at the prerogative of your creditors. But
what if you source from a different, you get the new debts from a different source?
Yeah, but if you get from a different source, then I don't know how it has taken care of your old debt. Your old debt still has to remain. So in refinancing, it obviously means that you are doing it with your old creditor. Yeah, because that's how you can do the swap. You can't swap with someone who you never had any debt arrangements with. So concerning the minister and IMF's response to the minister, I don't know if she was just making a proposal, but when I read her statement, it was that we are talking with World Bank and IMF. So it gave an impression that negotiations have started taking place. But you know, debt restructuring, a very important, bankruptcy is at a very high cost. Debt restructuring, the cost of debt restructuring is a bit lower than bankruptcy. But the time involved is what makes it a very hectic, it takes a very hectic process. Sometimes it could last 1, 2, 3 years, because the person who you are going to meet to restructure your debt has to confirm that you really have revenue issues, you really have financial distress. Because anybody can just come because you want to ask for payment and favorable payment terms. You can just come and say, restructure my debt. So those bodies...
Could that be the reason why the World Bank says it's in talk to the IMF on assessing Nigeria's debt sustainability?
Exactly, that's what it has to mean. They have to come and see it. And you know, because we have so many financial wastages, I don't think those visitors are going to find any reason. Because what have we done on our part to show that when you see a debtor owing you money and he's driving a Lexus past you and he's telling you, please forgive me my debts now. So it's very difficult to swallow, because what has happened on cost of governance angle? You look at the 2023 budget, 169 billion is still being budgeted in the National Assembly. You see the State House, the presidency is getting 133 billion. So you still see the head of service, 48 billion. What are you doing for the head of service? That's minus personnel costs. Personnel costs are budgeted at 1.12. So if you are budgeting 48 billion to the head of civil service office, 48 billion to EFCC, EFCC is even supposed to be self-sustaining because what happens to the money they are refunding? So you see that they will come and they will wonder, these people, do they really need debt restructuring? So it's a hectic process. I think they will have to come and check. And they have also given, it's more like a retort to what the minister has said. Immediately you heard the IMF president and the World Bank president saying that we should pursue financial discipline. They talked about the subsidy, they talked about other financial wastages, and that Nigeria should plug those. So it's almost like an indirect response to the minister that don't bother about it.
Exactly. Okay, but why that talk will be on? Because according to the World Bank president, Nigeria was yet to request. Is yet to request a framework for debt restructuring. So it's almost like the finance minister is saying one thing and then the World Bank president is saying another thing because like they have not officially received a request. Okay, so while they wait for that, is there a chance that Nigeria would default on its loan servicing?
It's seeming so. It seems so. Except you know, in fact, when they were to submit the budget proposal, we heard that there was not going to be provision for capital projects. The Minister of State for Budget, Mr. Clem Agba, said so last year, and even the initial projection was that there will be no. So, except we are, I think there's still some leeway. If you know, the budgets is just proposals; they are just proposals. It's not necessarily that will follow. So, I think if during the process of going through the year we see that we have financial constraints in Mr. Adel, we'll probably just ignore capital project. We have budgeted about 5.35 trillion for capital. They may just use everything for debt service. So for now, I don't think we are still very close to a point where we will default on our debt servicing. We don't. I think we are still some way away from that. But it will mean that we'll now be reprioritizing, dropping some other projects like capital projects and using it to fund the budgets. And we might be doing some, cut down on wages, but we are not yet at a point where we cannot service our debt. I don't think we are there yet. But debt servicing to revenue is getting very high. In the budget, it's 66%, but we know that most time, that's working with the revenue of 9.73, but we know that most time we never hit our projected revenue. In as I said, second quarter, we're 1.86 trillion. Throughout the year, I think as an average, we have made just about 5 trillion. So if you are budgeting 9.73 trillion and we have never met 6 trillion and our debt is 6.31, debt servicing is 6.31 trillion. So it means that we'll still be hovering around 110% of revenue to debt service. But in all, I think we are still a little bit, some years away from not being able to meet our debt servicing obligation.
Okay, as we were talking about the revenue projection not likely to be what is projected, what came to mind is what some economists analyzed when the budget was presented at the National Assembly. They called it an ambitious budget, that the estimates were ambitious given current realities, particularly with the oil theft issue. But now you're talking that it is less likely that Nigeria would default on its loan servicing. But if capital expenditure was to be forgone, how would that impact the economy and even the chance of the country being able to continue with debt servicing?
Yeah, it's very pathetic, really. Sometimes it's something that, because we are a developing economy, we are supposed to be hitting our capital, percentage of capital expenditure to total budget should be hitting something like 60%. We should be running 60-70% capital projects and 30% recurrent. But we are just, last year it was even higher, even when we were complaining. This year it's 5.35 trillion. Last year it was about 5.85 trillion. So we are just continuously running on recurrence. And it's a very terrible situation, because a country with with so much untapped capacity. We are not even up to close to full employment capacity. If a country like US, Russia, developed economies are running 10%, our capital expenditure in this budget is just 19%. If those countries, developed economies, are running that kind of low percentage, then we can understand here that they've met full capacity already. You have roads, you have infrastructure, power and everything, but we are a country that is going through power deficiency, we are going through road problems, we are going through light, electricity, and we are running a 5.19% capital expenditure. It's very pathetic. Our expenditure, it shows that our recurrence is just ballooning. Just personnel cost is about 4.99 trillion. So, but on the aspect of being an overambitious budget, I think it is better to be very realistic. I think it's better than the last year budget because some of the indicators, inflation was put at 17.61%. Last year it was put at 13%, and I remember we came here and I said that's the most overambitious indicator I've ever seen. And we ended up at 20.52. We're on 20.52 now. And it was
likely get to 22 exactly, at the end of the year.
By the end of the year. So it was really overambitious. But I think some of the estimates in this budget are a bit more realistic. I have to admit. The 17.61, it's okay. We might average next year at probably 18%, considering the fact that the Russia-Ukraine war doesn't seem any likely to abate. It's still continuing. More territories have been taken, and Ukraine is fighting to get them back. The energy crisis in Europe is still remaining, so that 17% seems a little bit realistic. $70 per barrel as oil benchmark is also realistic because we have been hovering around $100. I think it was just 92, the lowest in about 5-6 months, $92 per barrel, I think last week. So at $70 is very moderate. If we might try this the next year, we might average $100 because OPEC had a meeting just last Wednesday here, and they also cut quota. In fact, they cut about 2 million barrels a day in total. So oil will continue to sell very high. But so that would have been a very good opportunity for us to make money because if the budget is $70 and we average $100, so it means we'll have
gives us some surplus.
Yeah, it's $30. But that is if we are very sure of our production quota, because oil price and quota go together because it's your price times your production that will give you your revenue. Yeah, so if our price is okay, but the production we are not hitting, the president said we averaged $1.3 million over the last year, but that's even a little bit tough because just September year we were 972,000. We didn't even hit $1 million in September. So 1 million barrels a day. I think it's a bit still realistic. Then so apart from that, I think the budget is realistic. The only ambition or overambitiousness is the 20.51 trillion for the budget. Yeah, that looks high because we are not earning enough. So why increase it? That it's not like
how do we fund?
Exactly, it's not like it's seriously so high because countries like South Africa is running a budget of over 60 trillion, converted to our naira, 60 trillion, and they have just about 60 million people. But Nigeria is 20 trillion, that's like 1/3 of South Africa, and we have 200 million. So when you divide 20 trillion by 200 million, it's just like 100,000 for a city. But because we are not generating enough revenue, so it looks overambitious. So I think, and the oil theft revenue is, theft problem, is the minister, the Senate president and the speaker said during the budget presentation that about 1 million barrels of oil is being stolen every day. That's from no other person than the Senate president. That's on good authority.
Okay, so we'll come back to that after this break. Stay tuned. Thanks for staying tuned. We're still talking business. And before we went in that break, we've been looking at the restructuring of Nigeria's debt or proposal to restructure Nigeria's debt because it hasn't been done yet. Nigeria is just planning to do that. Okay, before we went into that break, you were talking about oil theft being a threat to revenue generation in Nigeria. But the NNPC and PTI have come up with a technology that they plan to install to detect oil theft and to prevent it. Do you think that will help the issue of oil theft in Nigeria?
Yeah, on paper, it seems to be a good move. Though we heard so much about that, so much. So we had a human rights and lawyer, Mr. Femi Falana, verbatim what we all know, that 17 billion was budgeted for a software in, I think, 2018 for procurement of a software to monitor our shipments. It's an international software that almost every country has. It monitors shipments from a country's shore down to the final destination where it's laying. And that since 2018, that's 17 billion to purchase that software that he has written to EFCC several times. So if we had budgeted 17 billion to buy that software and we didn't, we are still a country saying that people are stealing our oil. And you are wondering, oil is not matches or it's not sand that you can move from place to place without. So if we did not use that 17 billion to buy the softwares, we have budgeted billions to buy scanners for customs service. If we have not done all that, then I don't see where, I just look at, in my personal opinion, as another route to issue contracts again, and that money goes into private pocket. But if that's the case, that is really bought, then it would have been a good one, because the problem is that most multinational oil firms are leaving the country. Most are not ready to do new investments, because you as an oil firm, you don't want to put your oil into a pipeline with the hope that it's getting to your export terminal, and on the way, it's sabotaged. So it has discouraged many oil producing companies from IOCs. They've left the country, and those who are around are not putting as much investment as they would like to. So it's a worry. But if the software is going to be bought and is going to be used, then that's a good way, instead of us doing contracting to manual contraction. And as I was saying, that the Senate President said $1 million barrels is being stolen every day. That's from the authority of the Senate President. That's
almost like splitting Nigeria's production into half.
Exactly.
While the thieves take half, Nigeria takes half.
Yeah, so if our quota OPEC has given us 1.79, then it means that the thieves are taking 1 million and we are taking 790. So
even more than half.
Even more than, that's more than. So at 1 million, if oil was selling at 92, in fact yesterday it was $92 to a barrel. That times 1 million naira a day is $92 million a day.
That is being lost.
That is being lost. Times 30 days gives you about $2.78 billion. Then times 12 months of the year, times 12 months gives you about $33 billion. So multiply that by our exchange rate of about 720, you have about 24 trillion naira.
That is being
lost.
What is
our budget?
If we had that, we will not be having budget deficits.
Our budget is just 20 trillion.
So it covers that, and even gives us some surplus.
So you see that we are just almost like a country that is joking. And going back to the budget, as you said, sorry, as I said, it's a little bit, it's moderate here, because they put a projection of 3.75 as growth rate. Last budget was 4.25% annual growth rate. This is 3.75. So that's why I said it's a little bit more realistic. But how we get that 3.75 even for a developing economy? Because right now they've even changed the nomenclature. We are no more a developing economy. IMF has revealed that we are a less developed country. We are among the less developed countries now.
Okay. So that even as IMF has changed the nomenclature for Nigeria, this plan to seek for restructuring, do you think it will also change the perception of Nigeria, the way investors see Nigeria? Because as soon as that statement was made that the federal government plans to seek restructuring, the Eurobond was hit by that statement. So there was a retreat after government's statements.
Yeah, of course, it's a dampener. It's you know there's what you call announcement effect in economics and so on. It's a dampener, because by the time you hear that government is trying to restructure, it gives investors, it sends shivers down their spines because they are wondering, it means that our securities are not even, the assurance of even getting, because the essence of why you buy those bonds is that you get interest every month. That's why you buy financial securities. You buy it and go home and sleep, expecting to be getting a lot every month. So it's a dampener. It means that government paying your continuous interest is even at risk. So the new subscriptions will be a problem. So for the euro bonds, immediately it dropped from about 58 cents to about 56 cents. So that's for the bond holders. Then even for investors, in fact, the fact that this next year is going to be a transition year, you see most of the campaign manifestos of most of the parties. Almost all of them seem to be very strong departure from the ruling party. PDP, we know, are talking about the whole centerpiece of everything the presidential candidate Atiku is saying is privatization. He will sell the refineries, he will sell, most people have said that he's coming to sell almost the entire country. So it means that there's privatization as the slogan. LP, Labour Party, you can see that his own is a very strong departure. He has been talking so much against the ruling party's policies. Even the presidential candidate of the ruling party, you see most time he doesn't campaign so much about continuity. So it means that this coming year we might find a departure from the ruling party. So, and that's a signal to most foreign investors. They are going to be looking a sit-down look approach. They are going to look, they are not sure. This budget is more like, okay, we've just put it on the table, but they are going to be saying that they are going to be changing policy. So if a new government comes in May, whichever of these, from what we have seen from their campaign, there's not going to be continuity.
So they might be policy somersaults.
Exactly, a very strong one. So investors are looking, and those that are even existing in the economy will not put new investments. Those investors outside are looking and are just holding themselves to see what new policies will be.
But is that particular to Nigeria, or it happens with transitional governments? Yeah,
it happens with transitional government mainly, but because, as I said, if you have been seeing the former campaigns we have been running before now, it has always been, we'll give you water, we'll give you roads, we'll give you electricity. It has been a swan song. It's been between almost all the parties, almost, when you see most of their manifestos, they're almost the same thing. But this year in particular, we have drastic departures. When you look at their manifestos, none of them seem to be coming. For the first time, we are having some issues that are deviant with what the ruling party is doing. Look, especially this subsidy matter. You see, Atiku has said he will remove it. LP has said they will remove it. So it's not, this year is peculiar. And you know, recently the CBN has increased the CRR, cash reserve ratio of banks. It's now asking more banks to put more, to bring more, keep more of their funds with the CBN. So that has mopped up money from circulation. They also increased interest rate. So our growth projections may not be met. It's all aimed at reducing inflation. So it means that will have an effect on businessmen, because if you are asking commercial banks to increase their cash reserve ratio, it means you are mopping up from their vaults. That will affect how much they are able to give out to the public. So investments would reduce. That will affect growth projections. And so you know, those are the issues that I think will be common in this new financial year. And the fact that, you know, Eurobond issues has a problem now. We can't go to the bond markets to take loans. So I think most of that 10.78 trillion deficit, which we are looking for in the next year, will be largely domestic, because Fed has recently increased interest rate. Generally, interest rate has increased because of the U.S. increase in interest rate, and our dollar exchanging for naira is more difficult. So borrowing from the external source has seemed to be unfavorable now. So we'll do more of domestic borrowing, and that will bring crowding out effect, where government is now like the largest borrower of funds in the domestic market. So we are crowding out the private sector. So that would mean that you are leaving very small fraction. If government decides to go to the domestic market, it means that even banks will prefer to buy government securities rather than give out, which is safer, rather than give out to public to the public.
So that means less fund for the private
investment
sector.
So it all doesn't look rosy. So that's why, very particularly, investors will be looking next year and will be a little bit unsure of whether to come in. So next year, I just think this budget particularly is just a let's just roll kind of budget. There's really no anticipation there's no anticipation to next year budget.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take it up from investments. There's a planned investment in Lagos State, and that's the new airport to be sited at Lekki. Already, Lagos State has a local and international airport. Now, building another at the Lekki axis, do you have concerns about, do you think it would be economically viable to have a third airport in Lagos State?
Yeah, Lagos, I know we talked about Lagos some weeks ago and their development stride. Lagos has been a good example of what our ideal Nigeria should be. Very good example. And for me, it's one of the very good takeaways that I have about the country. You see, when the minister had the Civica, Ministry of Aviation, handed over the governor the letter of approval, it was at a summit. They called it Lagos Economic Summit. That was for 2022, where the essence of that summit was that they were rolling a plan from 2022 to 2052. The plan for Lagos. And you see this particular plan, which is now being rolled over. That's
like a 30-year
plan. So you see a state, you see a people or a government that's futuristic. The plan that is even being rolled over now was bettered in 1999 when Asiwaju Bola Tinubu was the governor. He bettered this plan that rolled from 1999 to 2022, which we are now. All these BRT lanes, Lagos Ekpe, Eco Atlantic, the Lagos Lekki Free Zone, they were all in that plan as at 1999. So you see a state that is moving forward. I cannot really complain about the airport. Lagos is too much of an epic center for even if you have 3-4 airports, it's not too much. Initially, I was questioning, but when I looked at the sense behind it, if you look at the Lekki area now, where this airport is, it's almost looking like a new Lagos. So Lagos is almost transitioning from the old Lagos to a new Lagos. Look at the Lekki Pedro area of the state. That's where you have the Lekki deep sea ports. One of the biggest is the biggest currently as it's being constructed in West Africa. Then you have the Lekki's deep sea port. That's the deep sea port. Then you have the Lekki seaport. You have Eco Atlantic City. For those of us who have gone there, it's almost like a new Dubai. You have the Alero City, another creation, all in Lekki there. You have the Dangote refinery. That's a masterpiece, or the largest in Africa. You have the Dangote fertilizer plant, all at Lekki there. So you have Victoria Island, which is another very huge part of Lagos. Before Lekki, that was the new part of Lagos, just some kilometers away. So it means that if you are having all this infrastructure, this new movement there, it only makes sense that you have an airport to complete it. Because imagine someone dealing with Dangote fertilizer, the biggest in Africa and second biggest in the world. It means it's going to be attracting international people of high repute. So you look at where the former airport is, it's at Ikeja, that's old Lagos. See the distance. Eco Atlantic, I said, is another masterpiece. It's going to be one of the largest new cities in West Africa, in fact, in the entire Africa. So you need an airport that serves. So it just seems like development is moving there. So it only makes sense that, and that's why you see their projection. They say it will hold about 5 million passengers a year. That's huge. And so you see that, for me, it makes sense. It just shows a state that is futuristic. It's going to be private sector driven, as they say. In fact, the plan has also been there since 1999 in this earlier budget, just that getting private funding had been the problem, getting funding to run it. So I think it makes all so much sense because development has moved there. There's now a new Lagos. So we have to have almost everything that makes that place truly a new city has to move there. So that's where I think there's so much sense in having that airport there. Yeah.
Okay, but speaking nationally, looking at the national picture, where you have in some states, you have one airport and you're about to have a third in one state.
Yeah.
Does that throw up a challenge for other states, or you find that there might be some form of protest to that approval?
Yeah, I think it's supposed to. It's a case of if you think you need it, then apply. Yeah, because I know Edo State was talking of one at Auchi, but I don't think that was even an international airport. It's supposed to be now. But you have to look at the business sense. It's not just about citing an airport just because you want to use it as campaign strategy, or there has to be some sense behind it. Look at these airports, even this our Benin airport. you see development now going towards all those Iwiri areas, Obazagbon, Ogba. Why? Because of the airport. So usually an airport brings development to the area. It saves time, then it brings newer markets. So you see the airport is now at Lekki. It brings the state, the government, the people close to new markets. Lekki is now the new market. So it's connecting people and a new market. So that's what it's supposed to be. But you don't cite, so if for example, does Edo need an international airport? I don't think so. Does Rivers need? I've not been there. So it's your commercial viabilities, the commercial happenings within a place that should necessitate an airport. Not necessarily an airport needed just because Lagos is having one. So Lekki, as I've explained, is not like a new state. So it only needs an airport. It's the airport, the commercial viability attracting the airport. So what are we, how viable are states? You look at Edo State, when you take out Benin, you can hardly think of any other place in the state that is commercial. Even the Benin city, I don't know how commercially viable it is. So how we were Edo State just because they want to even up with Lagos, now go and set up an international airport, even if it's a national, not international, in Ekpoma. And you'll be wondering what's the business sense there. So I think it's a challenge to other states, not necessarily to ask for another airport, but to grow their commercial viability. They should be challenged by the fact that Lagos is growing is growing their commercial viability. So I think that's where the challenge should come. Grow your commercial viability and not grow your need or your jealousy to want to even up with Lagos. When you grow your commercial viability, then you see that obviously calls for an airport, train station. You see Lagos, they are developing a train station down from Ikorodu, the mainland, down to Badagry. That's to the borders. They have a red line and a blue line. So you see that it's not just about even the airport. There are other infrastructure that come. Why? Because of the commercial viability of Lagos. So I think we have to grow our own commercial, our commercial viability. Lagos, Benin, Edo State, and so on, before we come. If there is even any state that should be talking of international, maybe Delta State, because when you look at Delta State, you almost have Benins. In fact, cities that are even more developed than you have about 10, 12 Benins in Delta State. You go to Okmana, you go to Uneme. There are so many states, cities in Delta that are more viable than this. So if you set up an airport in one of those cities, then you can be sure that there will be commercial. But for a state like that, I don't know about other states, but for a state like Edo State, I don't think we even use our airports enough to maximum capacity for us to be asking for another. So I think the summary is that grow your commercial viability. Then infrastructures like this will just naturally be asked for.
Okay, for an airport, does it necessarily have to be based on the commercial viability of the area, or that viability can be created because of the location? For instance, if you have an international airport sited somewhere outside of Abuja, outside of Lagos, would that not attract people from other states who want to move away from the congestion of Lagos State to maybe a place that is kind of central to them, or not too far off, not too populated, and that on its own will grow that place?
Yeah, looking at the law of demand and supply, really, I think usually supply is what attracts demand. Usually, supply attracts demand, just like a market. If we hear that Gary is cheap at Ugbogerbo market, for example, or Udo market, what happens is that you have people flocking towards that market. You hear people on Wednesday say, Wednesday is Ugbogerbo market, Udo market. People are running there to go. Why? Because there's a supply existing there of Gary where you know you get cheap. So usually supply attracts demand. So in putting it in the sense of the airport, I think if you put an international airport in Benin, probably in Ekpoma, for example.
Maybe not Edo State, but somewhere else.
Yeah. So it also depends on the commercial viability of those states. So
that's key.
That's key for me, because people are not going to just be flying for hobby. So you either fly for business or you fly for holidays, recreation. So you have places like Calabar now. People go there for recreation, go there for tourism, that's the word. So it could either be commercial, it could be tourism, but there has to be an attracting force.
What about proximity? If I have an airport that is close to me, for instance, maybe Ondo State, if I have an international airport that is close to me and I want to travel out of the country, if I live in Benin City, for instance, why travel to Lagos?
That's also part of it, but you know, most time when you are doing cost-benefit analysis, you want to look at how huge your benefit is compared to cost. So if that's, so how many people would really want to fly just because they need a transit to fly? But I think compared to the amount, building an airport is a very large-scale investment. Just the first phase of this Lekki International Airport has been put at $435 million. When you convert that to now, that's close to trillions. So when you look at the amount of investment that has to be put, you have to be sure that the benefit is going to outweigh times 2 the cost, because the shorter your recovery period, the better it is for you. So if you build an international airport and you look at how many people are closed, you are looking at those who will be wanting to come to as transit, look at how many years will it take you to recoup whatever you spent. So if the commercial viability is then 5-10 years, you get your, so I think cost benefit analysis will mean that commercial viability has to be put ahead of any other consideration.
On a final note, Lagos State seems to be flying the growth flag so high. Yeah. So what is the lesson here to learn?
Yeah, I think it's planning. It's just planning. I talked about the 1999 to 2022, then 2022 to 2050, and beyond planning, implementation. We had those at the Lagos Economic Summit. I was listening to the chairman of Citibank, who is one of the investors, saying that one of the factors that impressed them the most, that they are ready to put in so much money in building the airport, is implementation. That Lagos State has so far showed implementation drive. You see, almost all the projects, all the green state projects have been very, very, say Eko Atlantic City. It has gone beyond words now. If you know how much was spent in reclaiming, that was the former Babbage. So much was spent in reclaiming the land. So much, in fact, the number of trips of sand that were poured in there, then there was a wall. If you see the wall just beyond, before it was just sand trying to hold the water, but now there was what you call the Lagos Wall, like a great wall. You have pyramids. So much has been, so it shows that it's going beyond paper to implementation. So much has gone beyond. So that's what we expect from the country. The country, Nigeria, has been so much of paper designs without action. But Lagos has shown that they can put action to paper. So I think that's what the country can learn.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sazayua, an economist, for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So, do you agree now that it's been very scintillating discussions we had today? I'm sure you agree to that. Okay, so thankfully, Lagos State is in Nigeria. If it can happen for Lagos State with proper planning and implementation, of course, it can happen for Nigeria. I'm Blessing Aichi. Enjoy your weekend.